This video is very kindly sponsored by Skillshare. Now this channel is all about learning, and so is Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes for people either looking to learn something totally brand new or just learn more about something they already do but want to get better at, whether it's something you do as a hobby or as part of your real-world job. Now in my case, that's the writing aspect. I write sentences that go on for far too long sometimes and sound rushed. So the script writing course by Mary Ingracia is a course I've been watching to make my scripts sound clearer and therefore come across presented better to you. And it also helps with my Resident Evil fanfiction that will probably never see the light of day. There's also courses in audio recording, graphic design, journalism, and writing. Basically, everything you need to set up your own YouTube channels that deal with the history of motorsport. And the best part is, there's no adverts. So every single lecture is in full and totally uninterrupted, with new premium classes being uploaded every single day. And there's no time limits, so you can learn at your own pace. Now if you want to try it out for yourself, the first 1,000 people to click on the link in the description will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership, so you can give it a go for yourselves, with no obligation to pay when the free trial runs out. So once again, thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Let's get on with things. Hello there. Yes, I'm back. Kind of. I mean, I've done a couple of YouTube videos, but sort of neglected the podcast due to not having the energy to do it because of bloody Rona. Anyway, it is good to be back and to be able to deliver another episode of That Racing History podcast, where I look at the people, races, cars and series that shape the motorsport world. And today, I've got a hero to talk about. A guy with a brain the size of a planet, and probably the most successful man ever in Formula 1. Because he's got the most wins and he's got the most titles. It's not Schumacher, it's not Hamilton. It's the story of the genius designer that is Adrian Newey. Now, Adrian Newey was born on Boxing Day 1958 in Stratford-upon-Avon in Warwickshire, which is a very nice town actually, and it's also a town that likes to ask you at every opportunity one thing. Have you heard about that Shakespeare guy? Now, being from Stratford, Newey is technically a Midlander, so get in. And Newey was privately educated, attending Repton School in Derbyshire, where he was in the year above a certain loudmouth South Yorkshireman called Jeremy Clarkson. And a child of the 70s, Newey was into all of the rock bands of the time, specifically Pink Floyd, a band I don't get, which I know as a guitar player I'm apparently legally required to like Pink Floyd, but I never got into Led Zeppelin either. Still, it's better than disco. Now, if you're of a certain vintage, such as me, you may have seen a lot of emo kids at your school in the early 2000s trying ever so hard to keep their image in line with school uniform code. How black can I get my hair? Are these trousers jeans or not? All black Converses are allowed, right? I mean, they're all black. I know he tried to get away with wearing platform shoes at this ultra-strict private school, and uniform code said that if you could get a penny on its side in between the ground and sole of the shoe, it was illegal. So what Adrian did was get a piece of aluminium, glue it between the heel and the sole so the penny couldn't pass through the gap, yet still maintain the desired height of said shoes. No prizes for seeing the connection between then and now. And Roald Dahl also attended Repton School, and it seems that Repton has a bit of a reputation. And Dahl said that it was an environment of ritual cruelty, fagging, and beatings. Now, fagging is a term used in British private schools that essentially means servant. Senior boys would have younger pupils be their bitch for their own amusement, through doing domestic chores, running errands, and in some cases, actual sexual abuse. And in some schools, fagging may extend to the senior boys handing out corporal punishment, as the teacher's authority was only limited to the classrooms. And Roald Dahl actually said, all through my life I was appalled by the fact that the masters and senior boys were allowed to wound other boys, and sometimes quite severely, he wrote in the semi-autobiographical book called Boy. And Clarkson, who attended at the same time as Newey, said, as the years dragged by, I suffered many terrible things. I was thrown on an hourly basis into the ice plunge pool. I was dragged from my bed in the middle of the night and beaten, made to lick the lavatories clean, and all the usual humiliations that turn a small boy into a gibbering, sobbering, suicidal wreck. In the first 2 years, the older boys broke pretty much everything I owned. They glued my records together, they snapped my compass, they ate my biscuits, they defecated in my tuck box, and they cut my trousers in half with a pair of garden shears. And whether Newey was subjected to the same torment, I don't know. He has a book, but I haven't had the time to read it yet. And like Jeremy Clarkson, Newey was expelled from the school. And while Clarkson was expelled for being Clarkson, Newey was expelled for being Bart Simpson. You know the episode of The Simpsons where Bart connects all the megaphones together and then levels most of the town? Same principle but with real-world physics. There was a concert at the school for the sixth formers, which is the 2 optional years you could do after finishing school age 16, but Adrian never did his A-levels. The concert was held in the Pears building, an 11th century building with 11th century stained glass windows. Windows that had survived some of history's biggest bastards like Henry VIII, Oliver Cromwell, Adolf Hitler. And he and his mates smuggled in Bacardi and Coke. And when the sound guy disappeared, Adrian stuck all the faders to maximum and blew out every single one of the stained glass windows. It's just a prank, bro. So he ended up doing his A-levels in Royal Leamington Spa, which is another really nice town actually. My brother used to live there, before moving down to Southampton where he bagged a first-class honours degree in aeronautics and astronautics in 1980. After leaving university, he asked every F1 team based in England if there was a chance at a job, to which he got the same old, "We will only take people with experience" spiel. Which is bollocks. How are you supposed to get experience if no one will give you any? Anyway, one person actually bothered to actually invite him over for a meeting, and that was Harvey Postlethwaite, who was the technical director at Fittipaldi. Newey hopped onto his motorcycle and went to see him. When he entered the office, Newey was still in his leathers, and Harvey said, "What bike you got?" Newey said, "Ducati 900 SS." And Harvey went, "Cool, I've got a Guzzi Le Mans. Can I have a go on your Ducati?" Postlethwaite went round the estate, came back, and went, "Alright, when can you start?" If only all job interviews were that easy. In 1984, he went stateside where he worked on the March IndyCar project and was the designer of the car as well as the race engineer for Bobby Rahal. The March 85C won the 1985 kart title driven by Al Unser Jr. and also the 1985 Indy 500 with Danny Sullivan. The following year, the 86C won the kart and Indy double with Rahal. And then, Newey moved back to Europe in 1988, with his first F1 car being the 1988 March 881. In that car, Ivan Capelli finished second at Estoril, and the car even made a move on Alain Prost's vastly superior McLaren for the lead of the race on lap 16 of the Japanese Grand Prix. And the MP44 is a car that I'm going to have to cover in the podcast at a later date. March was bought by the Leighton House Company in 1990, and the results dwindled. Newey was later fired for apparently designing a crap car, but later said, "I was fired, but I'd already been offered another job. When a team gets run by an accountant, it's time to move." Williams had approached him. Patrick Head made the signing of the century. Yes, there were some big-name drivers of that time in Mansell, Senna, Prost, Patrese and Berger, but a genius designer in a team with a massive budget and 2 of those brilliant drivers was a license to manufacture trophies. The first car Newey worked on was the FW14 in 1991, and it was every bit as good as Senna's McLaren, but it had a few teething problems, and as a result, Senna won the title from Nigel Mansell. At the same time, Williams had been working on some pretty nifty electronic gizmos, and with Newey, Head, and some young computer wizard called Paddy Lowe, the Williams of 1992 cruised to the championship, with Mansell wrapping it up by Hungary that year, back when championships had 16 races. Prost and Hill replaced the retiring Mansell and Patrese, and they repeated the process in 1993. But 1994 ended the back-to-back championship run. FIA President Max Mosley decided that Williams electronics made them too good, and with everybody else copying them, cars were going to be going too quick, and the driver aids had to go. As Prost had retired, Senna finally joined the team as he was desperate to get into a Williams as they were on the up and McLaren was declining. Newey knew the FW15C was aerodynamically sound, so he suggested they keep the car the same and make it 1994 legal. Senna said that it wouldn't work because the 15C was designed around Paddy Lowe's computer codes and it wouldn't be drivable. Newey persisted, and Senna relented. And at Brazil, the Williams struggled to keep up with Rory Byrne and Ross Brawn's Benetton B194, dodgy electronics or no dodgy electronics. The FW14 was a lot like the 2017 Mercedes, in that it only worked in a very, very small operating window. Outside of that, it was twitchy and borderline undrivable. But miraculously, Senna got pole position at the first 3 Grand Prix of the year. In the first race, Senna spun out overdriving to catch the Michael, In the second, he was punted by Laurini's Ferrari, and then clobbered by the Lord of Sisu Mika Häkkinen's McLaren. And then in Imola, disaster. It's a very contentious topic, this one, and again I'll have to cover the race in full at some point. What caused the FW16 to fly off the road at a corner that was barely a corner and kill one of the greatest drivers of all time? I mean, we'll probably never know, and I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty of it all because there's theories ranging from steering column failure to front wing stalling to bottoming out and all sorts of stuff like that, and it's still a sore subject for a lot of people. And Damon Hill, Senna's teammate at the time, wrote in his own book that he was going wider through Tamburello as there were a couple of bumps in there that were unsettling the car. Then there's also the aura around the event anyway, as one driver had already been killed, with Barrichello also hospitalised after an accident on the Friday. Senna was also convinced that the Benetton was running traction control, and it was later found that they had launch control, and I covered that in a YouTube video before, but again, I'll try and do it again in the podcast. And Senna was already screwed up from the events of the previous 2 days, and he'd got a car that wasn't as good as it probably should have been. But it was Newey who, in the run-up to the tragedy, devised a welded modification to the car's steering column in answer to Senna's request for something to stop his knuckles rubbing painfully on the inside of the chassis. A popular theory suggested that the Brazilian lost control when the shaft broke at the improvised weld, or that it fractured after the car had started to break away, leaving the driver helpless. Or it snapped on impact with the wall. Again, we just don't know. Nevertheless, after the race, Newey, Sir Frank and Sir Patrick were all charged with corporate manslaughter, as Head and Newey had designed the car and Frank owned the team. All three of them were cleared, not by a jury, but because of the sheer complexity of the Italian legal system. Basically, the statute ran out. Newey does feel guilty about it, as he feels he screwed up the car. The instability of the car no doubt contributed to the crash. By the time they got to Imola, he knew how to fix it, but time had denied them the ability to get the new parts out. He feels guilty, but not responsible. But things did improve over the course of the 1994 season. Schumacher's race bans after Silverstone helped Williams get back into it, and it all resulted in a showdown in Australia where Schumacher won in one of the most controversial situations in racing history. The 1995 car was decent, but Benetton still won the championship. Damon had the car to win, but Damon was Damon. Newey bounced back in 1996 with the FW18, one of my favourite racing cars of all time, and the two drivers of Hill and new teammate Jacques Villeneuve dominated the season, winning 12 of the 16 races. Newey was also in line to be the technical director of the team, but as Patrick Head was a major shareholder, the path was perma-blocked. Cracks began to show in the relationship, and Newey left after designing the 1997 Williams FW19 and then joined former colleague Paddy Lowe over at McLaren. Due to being on gardening leave, he wasn't able to influence the 1997 McLaren that much, instead taking the Neil Oatley design of the MP412 and updating it for the new 1998 regulations. Despite not having any input in the 12, it still won 3 races. Coulthard won at Melbourne and Monza, with Häkkinen taking a controversial win at a controversial race at Jerez. The 1998 car was an absolute menace to the other teams. In the first race, Häkkinen and Coulthard locked out the front row, with DC .043 off pole. The team then scored a 1-2 in the race. Häkkinen won by 7/10, but in the process, both the silver and black cars lapped the entire field. They repeated the process in Brazil, but by Argentina the Ferraris had brought new spec Goodyear tyres, and the ingenious second brake pedal had been banned. Coulthard later said of the MP413 that it was fantastic through all but the slowest of corners, as Newey prioritised aero grip over mechanical grip. But the car still won at Monaco. But from then on, McLaren's performances teetered off. Häkkinen won the drivers' titles in 98 and 99, but then the juggernaut that was the early 2000s Ferrari showed itself. Coulthard finished second in the 2001 season, but that was as good as it got. Newey almost signed for Jag, but then team principal Bobby Rahal couldn't get the deal through. Niki Lauda blocked it, and internal politics with Ford stopped Adrian going to Jaguar and maybe making them actually competitive. Great liveries though. Newey eventually did sign with Jaguar in 2006, but it was now owned by an energy drink company that actually sells a product. The deal was encouraged by David Coulthard, who also moved to the team from McLaren, and David said that if Red Bull had any desire of climbing up the grid and actually winning stuff, they needed Adrian Newey. His salary was $10 million a year. But like with the MP412, the Red Bull car hadn't got the input from him it needed and had a woeful 2006 season. But major regulation changes were only 3 years away, and Newey made the most of the budget he had. In 2008, the sister team in Toro Rosso outscored them due to problems with the A-team car. Then the 2009 regulations happened, and the team accelerated up to the upper echelons of the grid. Sebastian Vettel, who stepped up to the main team following Coulthard's retirement, won the team's first race in Shanghai, and won another in Silverstone, with Mark Webber winning in Germany. The second half of the 2009 season was strong, but not enough to overcome the early season advantage of the Brawn team, who later won the championship in Brazil with Jenson Button. The following year, Brawn became Mercedes and their double diffuser concept was banned. Red Bull now became the class of the field, with Webber on course for the title for most of the season, helped by how much of an all-round car the RB6 was. And there were a couple of slip-ups, chief among which being the two Red Bulls crashing into each other in Turkey, which resulted in Hamilton's McLaren leading home Button with Webber third. Then there was Webber's accident in Valencia where he did a full backflip over the Lotus of Heikki Kovalainen. Newey designed a new front wing that was taken to Silverstone, but Vettel broke his and then they gave Webber's to Vettel, with Webber getting the older, inferior one. Vettel was later tagged by Hamilton and got a puncture, leaving Webber to win the race. Something, not bad for a number 2 driver. With Red Bull taking the Constructors' Championship in Brazil, it meant that Newey was the first designer ever to win 3 titles with 3 different teams: Red Bull, McLaren, and Williams. But it was the 2011 car that showed Newey's true genius of thinking outside the box. When he read the rulebook, he had a similar thought process to what Brawn, Williams and Toyota had in 2009. Back then, those 3 teams said, "We can have a diffuser, but it doesn't say how many we can have." In 2011, Newey said, "I can have a diffuser, but there's nothing here that says I can't blow exhaust gases onto it." And Newey wasn't really the inventor of a blown diffuser, because exhaust-blown diffusers were used in a primitive state in the 90s. The 1994 Benetton had one, and the distinctive gargling sound Senna was hearing was that, and not traction control. Newey had toyed with blown diffusers in 2010. He'd also tried to put one on the MP418, but it's the 2011 car where it truly worked. The hot gases flying out the flattened exhaust blew over the rear of the car, creating downforce. Other teams tried frantically to copy the design with varying results, but as Newey had the head start, the car was utterly dominant due to an increase in rear downforce at the cost of nothing in terms of aerodynamic drag. Normally when a car oversteers, the driver can apply opposite lock or lift off the throttle, but the extra rear downforce created by the exhaust blowing along the rear floor and sealing the gap between it and the rear tyres means that by applying extra power when the car slid, it would grip again. And it makes a fantastic noise. And then it was banned because it was apparently too hot for TV. So Newey went back to basics, and went with a high rake angle for 2012 and did some other bits and pieces to try and claw back the downforce the FIA had taken from him. The car was not so hot in a straight line, but the cornering grip was better than the others. The car was also contentious in terms of its legality. There was a slot in the floor discovered by the other teams at Monaco, and it had been there since Bahrain, and it must have been legal because it was getting through all the checks. But because people complained, it was banned. Typical Formula 1. Then Red Bull was accused of fiddling with the throttle map, resulting in the throttle to be more open in medium-speed corners compared to the amount of torque produced, which meant more exhaust gas being produced and getting back some of the lost rear downforce as, blown diffusers are now banned. Even though Red Bull was found not to have broken the rules, the FIA ordered the car to be changed. But it was the RB9 that is to date Newey's crowning glory. Out of the 19 races, Vettel won 13 of them, with Webber's best result being second. The car benefited most from a mid-season change to the tyres following the calamity of the British Grand Prix to allow Vettel to run away with it. And since the start of the hybrid era, Newey has struggled to get a truly competitive car, at least until 2021 that is. Mercedes has been the team to beat for 7 years. There have been flashes of brilliance with Daniel Ricciardo and Max Verstappen having won races in Newey-designed cars, and now the cars have more aerodynamic grip to play with as the 2017 rules have come into play. Red Bull is starting to come back, and the new Honda engine is quite powerful. Outside of designing for Formula 1 teams, Newey has had a hand in designing fictional racing cars as if there were no rules, with the Red Bull X2010 and X2011 appearing in the Gran Turismo games. He's also designed boats for the America's Cup and even done some racing of his own, as he took part in the 2007 24 Hours of Le Mans. He's also an avid car collector. And I hope you're sitting down because this part is major oof. He has written off both an original Ford GT40 and a Jaguar E-Type. Yeah. Oof indeed. He also owns an RB5, and he's driven it at the 2010 Goodwood Festival of Speed. He was also awarded an OBE for his services to motorsport. His son, Harrison, is a racing driver. He's a member of Zancho, as it so happens. In total, Adrian Newey's cars have won over 100 Grand Prix and taken 10 constructors' titles, the most for any designer in Formula 1 history. Like Smokey Yunick and Colin Chapman, Newey is one of those guys who decided that there should be no box. He should work outside of it at all times. He is the only designer in Formula 1 that still uses a pencil and paper to design his cars, and was one of the first designers to enter Formula 1 with an actual degree and knowledge of theory and aerodynamics. With guys like Chapman, Murray, Head and Postlethwaite, back then the aerodynamics wasn't as crucial or advanced as it is now, and Newey got a head start in it all that took everybody else about 10 to 15 years to catch up. Got in at the right time, and certainly made the most of it. So this has been a look at the life and career of one Adrian Newey, the Jedi Master of Aerodynamics. If you've enjoyed this, you can show your support by liking the YouTube version of this podcast. And if you want the series on the go, you'll find it all on the dedicated Spotify channel over on Spotify. And while you're on Spotify, you can follow the podcast there, or if you're impatient, every new episode will be uploaded to YouTube first. And obviously, you can subscribe with the bell on, so you'll be notified of when that comes out. Or you can listen on, both platforms. I mean, I'm not going to stop you. That Racing History Podcast is a Patreon-backed show, and if you wish to help support this podcast or just my YouTube channel in general at a more personal level, then you can do so by heading to the Patreon page at patreon.com/Aidan Millward. That's AIDANMILLWARD. So Aidan with an A and not an E. And you can also follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and all that good stuff. And there is also a Discord where you can join in the chat there. For YouTube listeners, all that stuff is handily in the description box for you. So until next time, I've been Aidan Millward with That Racing History Podcast. Have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.